Grassroots. I'd like to introduce you to G.R. Mobely, and he will tell you more about himself as the presentation progresses. Big hand.
Before I really get started into this meaty presentation, I wanted to, and it is meaty, and I'm going to really breeze through this as fast as I possibly can, but I wanted to thank the Northwest Grassroots for having me and giving me an opportunity to really fire hose a lot of people tonight. I do have my books here, and the majority of the proceeds of the sale of the book will actually go to the Northwest Grassroots. So I'm not really going to make that much money on it. I don't like doing book tours and peddling, and as a matter of fact, when I do things like this, I always give the proceeds to the host organization, because I know that they're sitting there and I'm just going to be making them sick by, going through the Constitution and how bad it really is. Secondly, or thirdly, I do have a radio show in Spokane. It's on AM 1230, and I'm right now during your evening commute from 4 to 5 on Wednesdays, and hopefully we'll be growing that into Tuesdays and Thursdays as well within the next few months with sponsorship support and so forth. So without any further ado, what I have here is the irrefutable argument for Republic Review. Republic Review is a term that I came up with another constitutional scholar that is a play on judicial review, because the Supreme Court says that they want to have the power to be able to pull in throughout the Republic a case that they think that might be worthy of their view, even though it's outside of the constitutional jurisdiction. But Republic Review actually is an inherent right, and we are a republic, and the republic has the authority, and I will get into this, in actually overseeing the Constitution. So let me turn myself on, and here we go. So I have some fundamental premises. Reasonable people, equally informed, seldom disagree. The problem is that middle part. Equally informed. We have a lot of people that don't necessarily have the same level of information. The second premise is knowledge is power. I think everybody understands, and as soon as you start understanding what you need to be doing, then you become a little more powerful, and knowledge is also dangerous. And so the third part of this is that, and this is basically a phrase from Madison, and I think it was common knowledge back in the framers' days, the people are the fountain of political power. And so tying these three things together, becoming equally informed and becoming knowledgeable in the right ways of truly understanding the actual academic applications of the Constitution and getting back into what the framers gave us will help us concentrate our power as the fountain of power, because the people are the fountain of power. And the problem with our representation, if any of them are still left that are back in DC, or back, not in DC, back in Olympia and DC, if Kathy was here, is that we redirect them in so many different ways. So I want to go through this, and I want you to keep this in mind, that there are so many distractions that are causing our problems, that we're not focused and succinct in the message that we want our representatives to save us from federal tyranny. So if you didn't know, the Constitution was written for and by the states. It didn't just come up from the Potomac, and it didn't just come from a good rainfall out in a field. The states sent delegates, and the states had to ratify this. And so one of the unique things about our Constitution is that the sovereignty was actually evenly distributed. The majority of the power obviously rests with the people, but the states are really the overseers, and we're the ones that are supposed to be controlling the states. So if you can grasp that, then Article 7 should make sense if you know what Article 7 is. It's the ratification process. Article 7 identifies who the stakeholders are of the Constitution. Who was it? It was the states. And the 13 original states are the real stakeholders, and all states that came in basically became equal stakeholders in that same Constitution. So Washington is a part of the stakeholders and owners of this Constitution. It's not the federal government, it's not the Supreme Court. They are the highest authority and sovereigns in the world over the world's greatest government. Do you fathom that? I hope so. So if you understand this ratification clause, which is a part of Article 7, ratification is the official and formal acceptance of a contract. Basically, it's pointing out that this Constitution is a contract. Madison said this. Jefferson said this. All the framers interchanged compact, constitution, and contract. They were interchangeable several times. In many of their writings, they referred to it as compacts and contracts. That being said, the ratification process didn't just happen in a bubble, nor was it an up and down vote where everybody just voted, yeah, we're going to accept this. Guess what? In contract law, if you understand what happens when you're negotiating a contract, the negotiations of that contract actually become legally binding. If you understand that I say that this line means this, and you, sir, have given me this contract that you've written, and you say, no, this is exactly what it means, and you write that down, that's legally binding to what that contract means. And that's exactly what happened during these ratification debates. But I'll get into that a little sooner. But what the Constitution actually did do in these two things, these two bullets here at the very bottom, is it delegated very specific powers to the federal government. This is all they can do, nothing more. This is what we delegate to you to do. That second one, that second bullet, is what basically the states have retained, basically giving them supremacy on all things not delegated. Healthcare, not delegated. The states are supreme in that. Everything that we really understand that the federal government is doing, over 80%, as I say in my executive summary, is unconstitutional. These are the delegated powers. I think it's really important I put them up here. We're just going to fly through these. I'm not going to read these. And at the very bottom, you'll notice the blue words will denote the commonly used usurpations that the federal government uses, or as far as the clauses, Commerce Clause, General Welfare Clause, Necessary and Proper Clause, and the Supremacy Clause. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say this at the very end, that all of these slides I'm putting up will be in PDF format on my website, and if Northwest Grassroots has a website as well, but I have reclaimingtherepublic.org and mobiustrippress.org. They'll all point to the where you can get these. And if you follow me on Facebook, I'll announce it as soon as I get these things up. So that way you can actually go through this and garner more, because I'm not reading these for you. And I don't have the time, because I understand opportunity costs, and I really appreciate you being here. So this is page 1 of the delegated powers. This is Article 1, Section 8. Here's page 2 of the delegated powers. Oversight is an inherent vehicle in a contract. If you have a subcontractor that is failing to execute as you've told them, and they've taken privileges or latitude in the contract, you have the power to go in and say, we did not give you this, or delegate these powers to you, and you can actually kick them out, or you can get them back into the framework if they want to behave well. That's the power the states have. And in the ratification, as I said this before, the mediations, negotiations, and everything that they clarified are legally binding. So here's why John Marshall did not want to have these things as a part of their standard. He never cited the ratification debates. Why? Because he knew what was said, because he was at the Virginia ratification debate, and it would have tied his hands to saying, well, I guess the federal government isn't supreme in these particular cases or in all things, as he did later, and I'll get into that. So therefore, the states are the principal stakeholders of the Constitution, and they have the ability to actually step in at any point in time, because it is inherent of oversight and control in any contract. If you are the stakeholder, you can step in at any point and take over. So the modification process is another thing that supports this. Who has the power to make any changes to the Constitution? Can the Supreme Court come along and say, we want to grant the ability to give abortions? No, they can't. It's well outside their jurisdiction. They don't have the power to make those changes, but they do it because we've been told that they can. Marshall created these precedents a long time ago, but the Article 5 process clearly states who is the arbiter, or I should say, who is the final arbiter of what becomes constitutional, what isn't constitutional. It's the states. It requires 3/4 of the states to allow something to be changed to the Constitution. Not the president, not Congress, nor the Supreme Court. The states have that kind of power. So if we move forward real quick, and I set up these facts of precedence, if you look at what the federal government did right out the gate, right after the Constitution was signed, they set up a precedence of obeying the Constitution. Imagine that. They actually lived by it because they amended the Constitution 12 times while the framers were still alive. And as a matter of fact, if you look at this 12th Amendment, the 12th Amendment, or I'm sorry, is it the 12th? Yeah, it's the 12th Amendment, because that was the Jefferson-Adams debate over the Electoral College, because it took 80 votes to finally get the president seated to be Jefferson. And so they changed the Electoral College. So they made a minute change to Article 2, and they amended the Constitution for that. Guess what? We're not even following that, because Congress took it upon themselves to say we can create statutes and regulations now and change how we do our Electoral College. And that's why we're not doing it per of Article 11, or I should say, per the 12th Amendment. So let me give you a little pitch on our federal government. If everybody doesn't know, the president is the executive, and he's supposed to faithfully execute the laws, not create laws, execute. He has the biggest stake in foreign policy, and to me that's one of the most important things, is what is this foreign policies. Congress is supposed to legislate and create the laws that are pertinent to the enumerated powers, not create new powers. And the best part is the Supreme Court is supposed to be the guardians. They're supposed to protect the Constitution from encroachments from the legislation or encroachments from the executive. And if you read the Federalist Papers, one would think that these guys were holy men, that they would have been holy men, but they're not, and they're obviously very corruptible. Bottom line, the states have, and it's incredible that the states have this ability, and as I say it down here at the very bottom, this contractual authority that the states possess cannot be usurped, delegated, or abdicated voluntarily or by force. It has to be changed per the Constitution and the constitutional process, and the states are asleep at the wheel. So the Constitution's been under attack for a long time, and in 1803 was the first time by the judiciary with judicial review. The first time by Congress that was really egregious was 1817 with, no, it was 1817 with Madison, I'm sorry. I've just got all these other numbers. 1849 was the year that they actually successfully created an unconstitutional department called the Department of Interior, which is the BLM. We got a problem with those guys? Okay, so that is an unconstitutional department. And in 1829 was the first time the president really stepped over his bounds and actually persecuted people, such as the Trail of Tears. This was Andrew Jackson, when he actually started reigning with some tyranny. He got some things right, but he was our first living king, overstepping his bounds, and we've had nothing but kings since. So the judiciary has used these 4 clauses to usurp the state's powers. And if you go through the language of the Constitution, the language of the Federalist Papers, the Constitutional Convention, ratification debates, and so forth, it does not jive with what John Marshall said. The 4 clauses, in actuality, really, and as a matter of fact, let me jump to this Commerce Clause, which is the 3rd one down. There's this thing called regulate, and people read in the commerce, what, they're supposed to regulate commerce? No. Back then, the definition of regulate meant put in good order. That was the common use, and as a matter of fact, they didn't have heavy regulations and heavy-handed tactics of government. If you look, they were a laissez-faire, not involved at all unless there was a direct dispute between one state or another, or in contracts and so forth. As far as the necessary and proper clause and all of these other ones, there's a real good document I'm going to get to real quick here. But these are the 7 landmark cases. I believe it's 7 up there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 7. I know that a few people point to 8 and 9. But these, to me, are the real 7 landmark cases that John Marshall used to create rulings that what he ended up doing was created unconstitutional footings for people to come in later because he injected precedents in case law. The Constitution does not allocate precedents and case law. Do you understand that? So in other words, because this happened or somebody said something, we believe we can make a decision in favor of doing this. No, it's either in the Constitution or not, and that's how they're supposed to read it. There's no case law allowed in the Constitution. And then if you read the ratification debates, they were very clear. Had that been a part of the Constitutional Convention and the ratification debates, I'm telling you, the 13 states would have rejected it because they would have recognized that the judiciary would have had way too much power to be able to start moving decisions and amending the Constitution or making things constitutional. So in 1817, this is a very interesting story. Madison was just getting out of his presidency. He had a conversation sometime in late January, early February, with his colleagues from Congress, because he worked in Congress for a long time. And they wanted to know what they could do to create a hallmark bill that would, just make his legislation, right? Like Obamacare, his legislation. And so he said, the one thing that this nation really needs is the ability to move commerce from the hinterland to the ports and back and forth. And if we could move commerce more efficiently, that we would be an economic power that no one in the world could reckon with. And he was absolutely correct. They went across the aisle, or they went down, Pennsylvania's Avenue, and they created their legislation. They came back with what was called the bonus bill. And this bonus bill was vetoed by Madison. And they were really insulted by this fact. And you know what the Madison Monument is in Washington? The Library of Congress. That's the edifice for the guy we call the father of the Constitution, because obviously they were a little upset. But the fact is that if you read this one veto, and I say it right here, this is likely the most powerful one-page document written since the dawn and since now to this day for this republic, because he squashes these 4 clauses in this one veto. He basically says that the Supremacy Clause, the Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, and the General Welfare and Defense Clauses only pertain to the enumerated powers within the Constitution. These are not portals to granting new powers. This is Madison saying this. And so I invite you to read this if you haven't read my executive summary and all the citations. This is in my first book as well. So bottom line, they weren't supposed to do this. Well, they tried again in 1822 with James Monroe, and then they tried again in 1830 with Andrew Jackson. And both of those presidents vetoed what was going to be the Department of Transportation. All 3 said you have to amend the Constitution if you want to have a Department of Transportation. Well, seems to me, folks, we've got one. Please show me the amendment. We have 2 framers and a Johnny-come-lately President Jackson, but still, we got the precedents, and they said that we had to do this. So who's right? Who has the accuracy on this? Who's nadir on this point, right above the accuracy on this? And I'm going to tell you, it's Madison, because he knew. So if you remember that government picture that I had before, those top lists up there, if you look, interior, agriculture, those are all unconstitutional powers that were created via these clauses. Interesting. None of them have gone through the Article 5 process. And as a matter of fact, if you notice, there's a little blue box above the form of government. That is supposed to be the state's oversight to make sure that nothing gets created to weigh upon the republic. It has to be done within the confines of the Constitution, which is that kind of beige area that I have the Constitution barrier. So for them to create anything, it has to be within the Constitution, and they didn't do that. So in a macro, we have 15 executive departments, 585 agencies, offices, blah, 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 blah. Over 80% of them are unconstitutional. Now, I don't know if that's arbitrary, but to me, that definitely qualifies as federal tyranny. We didn't grant them these powers through the constitutional process. So the problem is really not about immigration. The problem isn't about abortion and all of these other education. You name it, you call it what you want if it's your passion. But I'm telling you, the problem is truly compliance to the Constitution. all of these problems that everybody's passionate about. Remember I was talking about that fountain of power. There's so many people that are caught up on whatever their passion of the day is, or the problem du jour. The problem du jour should be one thing and one thing alone: compliance with the Constitution. That's it. If we focus on that, all these other problems are going to go away. And this is our monster, and there's the focus. If we start focusing on the monster instead of these little arms, because they've truly created a leviathan. So I think this is a great picture to kind of show all the different arms that they've grown that have been unconstitutional. If any of those are up there that are your passion, then I would basically say, let's redirect your passion and focus down to what the real problem is, and that's the monster. If you want to get rid of these things, you have to kill the monster. So the Constitution is very clear. It gave the sole responsibility to the states. The framers knew exactly what they were doing. And again, it's not given to the president, and it's not given to Congress, and it's not given to the Supreme Court. So what do you do when a contract is being violated? And again, who's that ultimate authority that we can go to? There you go. It's an audit. It's a contract. It's inherent. We can audit the Constitution, that simple. As a matter of fact, I floated this out, and if you listen to my radio show today, I talked to Dr. Weil, who's the Dean of Honors for Middle Tennessee University, and he's the Dean of the Political Science Department. And he doesn't necessarily like my idea because he's an academic, and I have a lot of respect for this guy. He really understands the ins and outs and knows a lot more than me, but he doesn't argue the fact that the states don't have this power. He just would not want to see this because he believes that there would be an anarchy that might follow from this. Or there may be other problems, or there's precedents and so forth. But again, giving him the due respect of being an academic, I give him that. But there's lots of others that don't like this as well because they think, oh, we can't do this. We've got to educate everybody. So I'll get into how we do this, but this is what we really have to do. We must audit the Constitution, getting all the states involved, because we got to remember, it's our contract. So conducting an audit is one of those things that we can actually get down by going, or the basis of the audit is one of those things that we just basically have to follow the Constitution. Was the Constitution followed in creating any new roles, responsibilities, and powers? So we have to go through all of these existing roles, responsibilities, and powers and define that's constitutional, that's not constitutional. So here's the 12 executive departments that have been created since the framers created the first three, the defense, treasury, and state. So here's the other 12. Was the Article 5 process followed for them to have these delegated powers? Are these usurped? Well, you won't find any amendments, folks. So the key points to remember is Article 7 truly defined who the stakeholders were of the Constitution. It is in the Constitution who had to buy in. It had nothing to do with corporations or the federal government because it didn't exist. It required the states. Article 5 gives the states the power to dictate what is constitutional, what isn't. And because they passed these 12 departments under our nose and we've been sleeping at the wheel, I'm just here waking you up. I'm just here stating the obvious. We have the ability to challenge these as the Republic as we move forward. And so auditing the contract, again, is the obvious thing that we have to do. And it can start with one state. One. So eventually all states, once one state gets this going, all states are going to get into the game because they have skin in the game. And the audit is only an administrative function. So those of you who think that the exerting state power will lead to a very decimating thing to the Constitution, not at all. If you understand what an audit is to protect that document, protect the contract, right? And so when I talk about a convention for Republic review, I'm not talking about a convention that's going to amend, write, rewrite, make any modifications. It's basically an audit of looking at what the Constitution says and what you're doing and going, you're not supposed to be doing these things. You're going to have to cease and desist. These are going to have to come back to the states. And the states will be the sovereigns and decide what they want to do. If you want a veterans affair, then we have to amend the Constitution. As a veteran, I would love to see that become constitutional, but it's unconstitutional. Bottom line. So we have to strictly go against the norm of accepting what they're doing because they're supreme, and we have to start looking in the paradigm that we are the supremes over whatever is constitutional and what isn't. So when we get one state to initiate this audit and this convention process, what it does is it's going to establish authenticity and reestablish the authority that the states have in this Constitution. You get that? They're going to reestablish their authority once again because the federal government has basically taken the role that they are the supreme in all things. Read the Washington State Constitution. It says that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Then why is it that the state of Washington is following all these unconstitutional things that aren't in the U.S. Constitution? So when we get the first state, it's going to call upon all the other states. And as a matter of fact, folks, this has happened before. You know who did this the first time in trying to call an audit? Anybody read my executive summary? Madison and Jefferson with the Sedition Acts tried to stand up and called all the states to say this is a constitutional violation of the First Amendment. They cannot regulate speech. And that's exactly what they did with the Sedition Act. And so they sent out an appeal to all the states saying, please join us in admonishing and setting the federal government right. Well, the other states didn't want to play along. That wasn't their fault at this point. But we cannot afford not to sit on our hands anymore. And I'm telling you, there's more than enough states that when they get this and when they start cogitating, ruminating, and digesting this information, why is it that, they haven't started this sooner? The convention in auditing the Constitution is what I call Republic Review. It is pulling the Republic together and reviewing that document and ensuring that what's being performed and what's being done is within the purview of that document, period. I think it's a logical marketing concept, Republic Review. Again, it is not a constitutional convention. It is not a convention of states. These two terms, convention of states and or a constitutional convention, requires an Article 5 application of the states to Congress. The states don't need to apply when they want to enforce their contract. All they need to do is say, you know what, we're done. You're running us into the ditch on debt. You're doing all of these tyrannical things to us. You're taking our property. We're done. We're going to audit you. Prove to me today that you actually have the authority from our state to exercise the Department of Interior, to have any BLMs, ATFs, and all of these things, FBI. All of these things are outside the purview of the Constitution. So guess who's public enemy number one? The guy that's saying this. But if you all start focusing and join me in getting this out and becoming a part of the constitutional warrior that I'm hoping to make out of everybody, then when I get killed, because, believe me, if they find me cut up in the freezer, don't believe the suicide note, okay? So Republic Review is not any of these two types of conventions, just to make clear, because a lot of people, they see that C word, convention, and they go, oh, I don't know. That's bad. What is the definition of a convention? Does anybody know? It's a process. In engineering, there are conventions. There are processes of manufacturing. There's processes. That's what convention really means. Anyway, in conclusion, all of these slides, like I said at the very beginning, these are going to be available, as well as these videos and so forth. So this is round one of what we have to do. The second presentation, and both of these presentations I've never given to anybody, so this is all kind of new material. So forgive me if I've stumbled or if I've sprayed on you for getting too excited. But anyway, are there any questions?